So, Peter, what's the difference do you feel between you doing something and an average, ordinary person doing something? Is there
absolutely nothing?
No, I mean, like, is there that there's a way in which maybe I'm kind of guessing that there's a way in which the impulse to the doing travels more efficient to that action for you. Like, is it like there's this ego or personality structure that normally runs a certain interference for most people?
Not really. It may look like that, but not really. All action, all apparent action proceeds spontaneously from reality itself, within reality itself. There is no doer, there is no action done. And that's the only thing that happens. So that's true for anyone and everyone, if any.
Isn't it like there's
But it can appear in terms of, because what's being done, action is not a simple thing. Action is the appearance of the totality of actuality in the instant. So this is the action right here, and this is, you could say that it's not the result of the action, this is the action itself. So that it's inclusive. So you could say, I'm picking up my chai, that's an action, but that's a spin doctoring of extreme partializing of something which is not at all like that, because the actual event is this. Nothing is being excluded or left out. And what is doing this is doing everything that appears in it. And if part of what appears in that is being interpreted as being all sorts of personality mechanisms, then that's just how it happens to appear to be.
The last time I think you're talking about personality or the social structure or whatever being like a vortice of energy, right?
Well, that's poetry.
Okay, so it's not useful or whatever to think of like there's a flow of energy that happens, and then there's maybe this vortice of personality structure that's spinning off.
No, not in the least.
Oh, okay.
There's everything that appears as the embodiment of, you could call it your karma, the embodiment of your nature, which may include what you're interpreting to be various personality mechanisms, may include what you're interpreting to be objective events that seem to be occurring coincidentally or whatever, and so on and so forth. But in actuality, every single thing that seems to appear is an expression of your nature, or you could say an expression of the nature of reality, which is your nature, because you are reality.
So a personality structure can actually be found. The only thing that can be found is this.
Yeah, and that applies, computers can't be found, cities can't be found, planets can't be found, but this is here, and this can be interpreted as being all that kind of stuff. But those interpretations are heavy-handed partializings and heavy-handed well, I'll just say heavy-handed partializings.
And so there's this in the shining the radiance, and then there is a tendency sometimes of partializing that radiance and separating it off from what it actually is. Right? That's what
Well, that itself is radiance. It just happen. It can look as if it's that. It can look as if there's mental mechanisms, and it can look as if these mental mechanisms are running interpretations, and it can look as if these interpretations are heavy-handed censorship of something that's completely ungraspable. And it can look as if there's identification with those, which is, the state that is, stereotypically called delusion. But in actuality, that condition is reality itself, and nothing other than reality itself. So interpreting that as being that, and interpreting that as being delusion, is itself delusional. And seeing that that is so is realization, is liberation.
And there is there are these tendencies of partializing certain things, and those tendencies of partializing eventually exhaust themselves.
Well, everything exhausts itself. I mean, everything is continually disappearing. That is a state of total exhaustion. In fact, nothing actually appears because by the time it appears, it's already disappeared. So you can't find any actual apparition. And yet, here we are. So go figure. I think the brunt of your question is actually that actuality seems to be with itself immaturely. And when it's with itself immaturely, it flails around and uses very heavy-handed, unsubtle techniques of trying to figure out what it is. All that's happening here is actuality looking at itself. That's what's happening here. And actuality is intoxicated with itself. It's incredibly fascinated with itself. It's addicted to itself, seemingly. And it seems, mysteriously, it seems as if actuality is with itself naively and immaturely and clumsily and very heavy-handedly. And when this mode seems to be prevailing, then there's all sorts of heavy-handed apparent interpretations and identifications and so on and so forth. Again, the condition that's usually called delusion. But the very nature of actuality being with itself is a process of refinement, seemingly, where it learns how to be with itself more subtly, more profoundly, more maturely, which gradually outgrows the obvious fallacy inherent in these heavy-handed and clumsy ways of being with itself, and it learns to be with itself more precisely as it actually is, in its absolutely transcendental, absolutely inconceivable mode, let's call it. So you could say that's the the immaturity exhausting itself, but what it is, it cannot be said. It looks as if, arguably it looks as if the way I just described it seems to be something like that, but you can't say that it is, and you can't say what any of that actually is, because again, the whole thing is transcendental and ungraspable. It doesn't resolve into any kind of a precise, findable, resolvable condition that can then be analyzed or scrutinized.
So then we just talk of this learning. as you're saying, of actuality be with itself in a more precise and refined way.
Sure. I mean, that's what happens here, whether we talk of it or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
But on the other hand, curious, if one is curious about
Right.
These issues, then that is a less inaccurate way to look at it than many, perhaps.
Yeah, there is that curiosity, and something in what you're saying. It is like as a flash of a revelation, or of like of seeing that sort of a flash of what's so, or even though there's nothing to grasp or to be, but there's just an alignment, maybe.
Sure, and that is what actuality discovers as it learns to be with itself more accurately, is that it is just a flash of implication that is nakedly present, and that is ultimately profound, but is unresolvable as to exactly what it is and exactly how it is known to be that. It's a mode of knowing or understanding that is in itself transcendental, in the sense that it transcends analysis of being able to say what the fuck's going on.
Right.
I mean, as actuality matures, it begins to take advantage of its own transcendental nature, which transcends the need for process.
Yeah.
It transcends the need for logic. It's just an immediacy of profundity, of meaningfulness, of revelation, that it actually is. It is that, and it is its own self-knowing of that. The whole thing, is what it is. And as it comes to see itself more nakedly, it sees that that's the case, and of course takes advantage of the fact that that's the case. So it itself, nakedly, in its very nature, becomes more and more transparently its own process. So its process is its own being, rather than any particular convoluted activity or action or something that is interpreted as occurring. And of course, we experience this, as that exact experience, because of course we are that. So at a certain point, analysis and conceptualization just recede as having any relevancy at all. Certainly doesn't necessarily cease, but it ceases to be really about anything. It's sort of background noise or what have you. And again, this direct, the intrinsic and inherent value of this direct flash of being / meaningfulness becomes more and more clear, more and more obvious, more and more is felt to be more and more profound and more available.
And well, in the light of that, then all else begins to drop away.
Well, it may or may not drop away, but it certainly
right.
recedes in any relevance or importance. Identification with anything else as having any urgency or importance recedes.
For the moment.
Well, whatever.
Yeah. There's something else in what you said in that dialogue, which was there's analysis or questioning or machinations of personality, or but there's just sort of, and that's just seen to be so. So there's almost like it's kind of got like there's a transparent quality that begins to be revealed.
Yeah, well, I mean, everything that one may be in the habit of holding as being an actual event or an actual subsystem of functioning or being or identity or what have you,
Yeah.
is seen to actually be an artifact of the fundamental actuality itself, and not in fact any kind of a subsystem, or not in fact any kind of autonomously existing mechanism or energy, but it is seen to be the base radiance itself, let's call it, as everything is. And again, so everything collapses into just the essential fact, the essential actuality, which of course it turns out it never was other than, but then all of this hypothesizing of all of this extraneous subsystems and methods and process and all of that is seen through as being a hallucination, or just basically a hypothesis which is not accurate.
Because otherwise then it starts to get.
I'm sorry?
Because otherwise then it starts to divide up. And then here's the actual, and then here's the substance.
Well, there's no otherwise. It's just not like that. So it validates itself.
Right.
It seemed to not be the case, and by that very fact, it is invalidated.
So words then, which is, so I listened, I met Gavin, and then we spoke, and we told me about you, and said to check out if there was something else, there was online, and I watched the video of last week's meeting at Open Secret, and there were a number of things that were, again, that were sort of, that felt like that were striking something like revelation, and which is what brings me here. One of those things is that sort of segues into which is words, and what the sort of the revelation what sort of struck was that a sense of seeing here the way that I can take that I will take words for their meaning rather than realizing their essential insubstantiality. So we use words to describe something. I noticed it made me aware of a tendency to stay in the sort of that dissection of words rather than just that and then returning. So I guess that somehow feels like related to again those subsystems. We use words to define, and then but that's all. The words are just pointing back to something.
Well, words by the logical mechanism that is imputed to words are supposedly referring to reality, and which with more or less accuracy. And then by manipulating words, we suppose we're referring to actuality with some degree of accuracy and so on and so forth.
Yes.
But in actuality, words are not referential. What words are expressions of actuality, as in the same sense that everything is an expression of actuality. And so the presence of words, the presence of language, is itself the very naked process of actuality. But it only accords with the inherent logic of the nature of actuality itself, not with the logic that is imputed to the structure of language and the definitions of words and all of that, all of which is just imaginary. And when one sees that, then using words becomes very, very easy, because the one becomes very careless of this, the process and the logic and the supposed, definitional relationships and all of that, and the speaking becomes simply a direct expression of the nature of actuality itself, and embodies meaningfulness in the same sense that all form appearing embodies the meaningfulness of actuality.
Yeah.
And so, which is of course a whole lot simpler,
Yeah.
and more nakedly true, because it's grounded in what it actually is, rather than grounded in this incredibly elaborate Baroque superstructure of conception and definition and logic and Disney.
Right. Right.
It's just, the same thing applies to any and every apparitional form. It applies as well, like we were just speaking of, to supposed personality elements and all of that. So all these various forms seem to be appearing, and they seem to have their own autonomous existence, and they seem to have their own autonomous logical structure and functional interrelationship with other forms, and blah, 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 all this incredible intricacy of mechanism and process and system. But actually all of that's a hallucination, because there's only one system, one mechanism, which is the immediate and direct radiance of actuality as any and every form, any and every apparent form, which forms don't actually exist because they cannot be resolved or found with any stability or any precision. They're seeming, all forms are seeming. It seems to be that way, but then you go looking and finding it. A, you can't resolve it. B, it's already gone. And so it's like trying to find a mirage. You chase after it and you never find it.
So it seems to know itself as an autonomous entity or an autonomous feeling state. And yet that felt sense has the feeling of being autonomous.
Right. Well, it is autonomous, but it's not autonomous in the way it seems to be. It's not autonomous as a subsystem. It's autonomous as the supreme autonomy of the absolute, of actuality itself.
So that feeling of separateness, of the felt sense of separateness, is the same feeling as everything.
Yes. It's not just the same feeling of everything, but it is literally the feeling of everything and anything. So I feel this, and there's an actuality there. There's a self-verifying, we would say autonomy of this as an actual existent presence. And it's an actual existent presence, but it's not the actual existent presence of a table.
Right. So
It's the actual existence presence of actuality itself.
So actuality knows always knows itself as an entity,
As what?
as seeming separate, autonomous.
Well, it can be seen to be that, but it doesn't have to be seen that way. I mean, obviously, we're all very familiar with seeming to have all these discrete, separate, autonomous subsystems in themselves that are all existent, but that's basically a hallucination. That's a fantasy that is being imposed upon the actuality of the single event, the sole event, which is all of this, without any actual division or separation. So there's only one event, and all apparent events are actually that one event, but interpreting them as differentiable from each other is a fallacy. And it's very peculiar that this one event presents with an infinite degree of apparent differentiation without actually any difference being present. It's one of the imponderable mysteries of its transcendental nature.
And yet it can't know itself as everything.
Well, there's no everything to know itself as.
I mean, that would be whatever.
It knows itself as, and more, I would say, rather than knowing itself as everything, it knows itself as anything. If there isn't anything, then that becomes the vehicle of it knowing itself. And that anything can be an incredibly intricate panorama of apparent environments and beings and interactions and so on. Or it can be a single flash of light or whatever. But the knowing is the same, and what's known is the same, regardless of what it looks like.
You can never get out of that.
There is no out, man.
It's
Let me out! Let me out! I'm gonna get out! I'm gonna get off the bus. Well, you're good, like there's no bus and there's no off, so. I mean, the fantasy of being in something, there's no in either. So you're not in anything. So getting out of anything, there's no you to get out and there's no it to get out of. And you're not in it. It just is. And that isness is absolutely transcendental. It transcends being any particular way. It transcends being spatial, it transcends being contained, it transcends being a container, it transcends being anything. So any mode you throw at it and hold it to be is a partializing of it, and it intrinsically transcends that. It may be that, but it's more than that as well, which ultimately undermines the seeming what it seemed to be in your initial instance.
It seems like there's something that is consistent. There's something that is always there.
Oh, it's absolutely consistent. Actuality is completely consistent. It's never gone. 100% reliable.
Peter, there's no better or worse.
Right.
No. And so if I were to say there was a better or worse, I would have to first introduce a sort of interpretive framework.
Right. Which is fine. I mean, you're free to do that. And you're even free to navigate with that as a premise. But even in the midst of all that, none of it is actually truly that.
So
But because even by doing that, you don't depart from actuality. And so if you know that, then you're free to do all that kind of thing without it being any kind of a detriment. So a realized being doesn't need to sit in samadhi all day. They can go out and go down to the pub and have a beer and get in a fight and insult their wife and anything they want, because there's nothing being lost by anything that seems to occur, and nothing being gained by anything else that would seem to occur. So it doesn't matter what seems to occur, and that being the case, one can be very careless about it.
Just like when you were talking earlier about words, it sounds like you can be very careless with how you express yourself.
Sure.
But you can do that in that context because the logic of language never departs from the logic of actuality.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's impossible to lie. It's impossible to say anything that's not true.
Even when you're talking about actuality?
Sure. Since you can't say anything true about actuality, how can you say anything untrue? And in fact, everything you say is true about actuality. It's just not the whole truth. Actuality sucks. Actuality is a prison. Actuality is a pain in the ass. Actuality is the bane of my existence. It's all true, but none of it's the complete truth. It doesn't paint a full picture.
Some statements depart further from the logic of being,
That would be true if there was a further. Let's put it this way. It's possible. It's possible to pretend more heavy-handedly to be embedded in a heavy-handed interpretive framework. But even when pretending that, that's never actually the case. So you're never in the interpretive framework, and the interpretive framework is never the case. So even in the midst of all that pretense, nothing has happened. Nothing has been lost. And there's nothing to be gained. And yet, seeing that is the only way to know that.
And you're talking about there's a process at work of actuality coming to realize itself, or
seemingly. I mean, it kind of looks like that.
And it's not the case that like certain statements that you would make to us would be more in line with that process, or
no, because there's no in line with that process. No, because there's nothing but that process. So anything and everything is in line with that process. Because the process is not an actual process. It's not mechanistic. It doesn't follow any kind of let's call it structurality of process. So everything is the vehicle of actuality discovering itself. And there's no hierarchy of anything being more that vehicle and anything else being less that vehicle. So, we could start hurling insults at each other, and that's just as much the process of actuality come to discover itself, as if we're sitting here discussing great profundities with delicacy and precision.
But you were making or it sounded like you were making a distinction earlier between the logic that language imputes to itself and the logic of actuality?
Well, there can seem to be a difference between those, and that seeming to have a difference is itself an interpretive framework. When you see that interpretive framework doesn't exist, then the whole notion of language having an implicit logic collapses, and you discover that it itself is nothing other than naked radiance, as of course any and everything is. The technique of dealing with interpretive frameworks is to see that they are interpretive frameworks. It doesn't matter whether you don't need to fight them or stop them or get out of them, just see them. You don't need to change anything. All you have to do is see what it is. And when you see what it is, you discover you're completely free of it, and it itself is an irrelevancy, because it itself is nothing other than radiance, and radiance cannot actually get in its own way. Radiance cannot actually impede itself. So all of the seeming impedance and all of the seeming entrapment that seems to occur in terms of the logic of interpretive frameworks is seen to not actually exist, so you're free of it all of a sudden. Without being free necessarily of interpretive frameworks, because you never were not free of them, and without the cessation of the apparent presence of interpretive frameworks, or not, because that's irrelevant anyway, because that's just radiance. And radiance cannot impede itself or cannot get in its own way.
Maybe it could.
Maybe it could. It could prove it.
But all those frameworks are bound to collapse.
I think it tricks itself.
Well, it does seem to trick itself, and that's what these interpretive frameworks are. It tricks itself through believing its own hypotheses.
Yeah.
But the liberation comes from the discovery, the inevitable discovery that these hypotheses are in fact hypotheses, because they do not stand up to examination. Because the facts will always disprove the hypotheses, because the facts are always beyond the hypotheses, because the facts are infinite and the hypotheses are finite.
The facts being.
Yes. I should say the fact, but I call radiant presence.
Another good word is evidence.
Sure.
I mean, when you're noticing, you're gathering evidence.
Exactly so. You know, actuality, experience reveals its nature is not in the least bit hidden or clouded or veiled. So simply, that's the process that I call noticing. Simply attending to the nature of experience, it conveys its nature, and it conveys the irrefutable evidence that it is transcendental and that it is beyond any and all interpretive frameworks, and that it is all inclusive, and so on and so forth. I mean, that's the good news from the point of view of a spiritual seeker, is this is available and not hidden. You just have to, seek and ye shall find, as the saying goes.
I'm reminded of there's a Zen saying that to seek is to suffer. So, which all of us know what that is. So it's to seek without seeking.
Yeah.
Would we say, or?
Well, seeking is suffering because of the fantasy that there's something to seek. When one sees that there's nothing to seek, then whether or not seeking occurs, it's not actually seeking. It's just being described as seeking, but it's revealed to be the inherent apparent vectors of actuality itself. So there's no personal involvement, there's no success and no failure. There's just unceasing apparent event without any actual event. Yeah. It's an endless game of hide and seek with nothing ever found and nothing ever lost.
No loss in the game.
So it gets out of that loop, that dichotomy of a seeking that can fail or can succeed,
right,
predicated on the idea that there is something to seek, and most fundamentally, that there is a need to seek it because of some lack
right,
that obtains in the pre-finding state, which is not the case. And when that seemed to be not the case, there's no lack, there's no gain, there's no loss, and so the whole event becomes a zero-sum game. Even if you find, you haven't found anything, and if you don't find, you aren't any the less for it. So the whole thing just dissolves in relevance and becomes, empty apparent event.
Because it's that sense of lack that creates the sense of seeking.
Yeah, the whole thing, and it's all a fantasy, because no such thing like that can actually be found. It doesn't stand up to scrutiny.
Right.
I mean, all of these fantasies don't stand up to scrutiny.
Right.
The evidence to sustain them, to verify them, is not findable. Because if one looks at experience, which is the only thing one can look at, of course, the nature of what experience is does not present as anything missing. And it does not present as anything found. It does not present as anything lost. None of those categories are relevant. And no category is relevant.
Interpretive frameworks, they're entertaining, can we say? And that's why we create them and perpetuate them.
So I don't know that I'd go so far as to say that's why,
Okay.
but there certainly may be entertaining and diverting.
Uh-huh.
It's like watching a soap opera on TV. If it's not entertaining and diverting, why the hell do you have it on?
Why turn it off? Or why seek to turn it off?
Well, why seek anything? If you want to turn it off, turn it off.
More entertaining at some point, because like the whole idea of a spiritual quest, there's a sort of game structure about that.
Of course.
Right?
Of course, it's predicated on all sorts of suppositions.
It's no longer amusing at some point.
I don't know. Depends what you mean by amusing. I mean, amusing is another interpretive framework.
Or well, as not as amusing as that which succeeds it. Right? Because actuality being with itself more transparently is more fun.
I would say most people who see that would probably share an opinion something like that. I can't assert it as a truth though.
But also that there's the spiritual journey is not, it's, you know, as you said in the last talk, it's something that's actuality moving towards us. So it's not like it's not something we can turn on or turn off, it seems to me.
Can't start it, can't stop it. Can't do it, can't not do it.
Right. Yeah.
None of those categories are relevant.
There's just a magnetic.
And yet coming to see that is the process of the spiritual journey.
Yeah, can't do it, can't not do it. There's a magnetic pull.
It's intrinsic.
Yeah.
It's intrinsic in the nature of actuality itself that it should be that way. Whatever that way is. And of course, we can describe it as looking as if it's, this process or quest or discovery or whatever, but that's more empty metaphor or empty hypothesis. What it actually is, who knows?
We talk about the spiritual quest, and like one other thing that struck me from what you said in the last talk is that everything is, we call it spirituality, but everything is actuality on its way towards itself.
Yeah, there's nothing but actuality, and if anything's happening, they're doing it. If anything is being done and anything is doing, a lot of ifs in there.
Right, because there can only be.
So calling it spirituality and all that is just more spin doctrine.
Right.
It's basically just life itself. The nature of life is to be what it is, which can be argued to look like it's this or that or the other.
And then so, and yet, it occurs to me that I'm even realizing when you're saying it, that I'll just say it, that those of us drawn towards it seems like towards the profound, tend to move on that spiritual path. But again, just more spin doctrine, as who's to say, someone who's.
Yes, but at a certain point in one's apparent trajectory, it becomes more relevant to engage with these things seemingly more directly and more efficiently, and more, more comprehensively and with a more radical engagement.
More rigor, more.
But it's not necessarily anything different. It's just perhaps a different phase of the same thing that is the soul process. And even if it is that, it kind of looks as if it might be something like that.
Yeah.
Peter, the idea that I'm a body that's also there's an interpretive structure there, right?
Good.
I just but there's people they'll talk about a sort of like going out and returning, or sort of going out into the transcendental and the ungrounded, and then a sort of returning to a greater sense of embodiment. And there's it seems like in a lot of spiritual disciplines that there are actual like practices that are suggested to help a student find a balance, as it were, between those poles, as it were. So like I was thinking of like in the Zen tradition, which there's a lot of focus on abstraction and transcendental things, and yet there are like these physical practices of like shoot the bow and rake the gravel, and then other traditions there's like all this talk about serve infinity and feed the poor and stuff like that. Am I sort of misunderstanding that? Like,
Feed the rich to the poor. Sorry, little joke. Sorry. Well, to get serious again. Were we ever serious? A lot of these kinds of things at their basis are exploring focus of attention. One of the techniques, I mean, all of those kinds of techniques and pseudo techniques that you mentioned, and many more, at their root are exploring the range of apparent textures and apparent dimensionalities that can seem to appear experientially by again through the apparent mechanism of exploring the possibilities of focusing within different textures and within different dimensions of the experiential field. And the main advantage of doing so is not because you go from something less good to something more good, but as an antidote to the idea that there's any limitation to be found structurally within, or let's say to be found dimensionally within the experiential field. When you discover the range of possible experiential contexts that can be found immediately within experience by exploring different, let's say less common focuses of attention, then this can serve as an antidote to a simplistic view of yourself as being embodied, or simplistic view of space and time existing objectively, and so on and so forth. The range of the ways this can seem to appear is inconceivably vast, and most of let's say most of that range quantitatively is ignored by consensus reality human attention. And so it's an antidote to that by becoming more deliberately aware of these other less common ranges of experiential texture with their implications. Again, it's just an antidote to the simplistic consensus reality kind of interpretive frameworks.
So there's also within those different traditions, there's talk about those different practices like qigong or hatha yoga or something like that. That what they're really good for is preparing the individual for meditation. But like I would imagine what you would say, kind of along the lines of what you just did say, is that if you've got a more physically oriented practice, then it sensitizes you to these like more subtle sensual qualities, right? Or
Sure.
more.
Sure. Yeah, you can say that. You can say it, put it that way. I mean, I would not necessarily sensitize it so much as reveals the viability of those options experientially. Whereas it's typical when one adheres to a more simplistic consensus reality frame of reference to just basically deny and ignore whole ranges of experience. So if you're doing some kind of a practice where there's supposed to be a subtle energy that you can manipulate and these kinds of things, all of a sudden you may become aware of, wow, there's something going on there that I've never attended to. And right there is a revelation of a greater range of experiential possibility or experiential texture or dimension than one is used to acknowledging. And so a progression of this kind of investigative exploration can basically undermine or invalidate any kind of a small-minded interpretive framework. And that is meditation. And that may become an adjunct to something else that's being interpreted as meditation, which is really just more of the same.
And the idea of transmission in that context is the student is being present with someone who is more consciously present of present with those subtle sensual qualities or
Sure.
that sort of subtle energy.
Sure, one can learn by display. One can learn by exposure. If you don't know what music is, and you're all in the presence of someone who's a master musician, and they're playing, and you're there with them, your eyes will be open. It's like, wow, I didn't even know this was possible. But you get exposed to a whole range of whatever, subtle actuality that you may not have imagined was even possible.
Yeah.
Shall we take a break for dessert or whatever? So we'll be back in about 10 or 15 minutes. around the spotlight there.
You need to turn it.
There you go.
This is where I take off my clothes.
Yeah. Please do. Okay, profound meditation.
That's a good metaphor for the spiritual process, right? The sort of lifting of the veils. I think you should demonstrate that for the audience.
Oh, the chakras never got. Do you have a little sharp knife?
I'm supposed to.
Sure, I do.
Like a small. That's just
Did you
small.
say I surpassed that? I'm supposed to stripping.
Oh, that's.
That means in your younger days you weren't beneath doing that.
Absolutely. You missed it just like my first 2 weeks. Here.
Oh, first 2 weeks with Peter, you just couldn't keep your clothes on.
Done. I wasn't advanced enough yet.
Oh, I see. John was stripping back then.
It's okay. I figured the entertainment was optional. More for the buck. This stripping is not very entertaining.
When I was in college, I tried to start a stripping society. Or a streaking society.
Streaking.
Aren't
you old for that?
I called it SOS, Society of Streakers.
Did you manage to do any streaking?
Well, I did mostly on my own. There were some group streaks once in a while, but they were spontaneous for the most part. And I could never seem to organize it. Yeah.
So in what circumstances did you streak?
Oh, well, so there was like every quarter, or no, every semester there would be this big campus-wide party. It was called Wild, walk in, lay down, and there was like bands and stuff, and people would get really drunk and pick each other up. And so there was oftentimes like there would be like a group streak there, like whatever, 60, 100 people.
I have some very fancy chocolates that are now being put out. If anyone wants
Oh,
I'm noticing that. What campus was that?
that was Washington University in St. Louis.
St. Louis?
Uh-huh. Yeah, nice place. I didn't appreciate it enough when I was there. Too busy being a depressive youth.
They're all different. They each cut in half. So each one of those interesting and try
Thank you, Peter.
it. Is that good? Actually?
So Peter, you had some chai, right?
Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna start putting a little less ginger in.
Yeah, I thought it was good.
This one, this is
Yeah.
good, but I mean,
Well, I like
I've been
it. I like
putting
it.
too much ginger.
Yeah, I like it
Seems to
real
be
strong,
better.
but it's it doesn't need to be that strong.
Yeah,
I think the most important ingredients are cardamom. As long as there's lots of cardamom.
yeah, there's
Then
always,
you have a lot of latitude with the ginger.
yeah, and I put cloves and,
It's kind of, even a little ginger, it shows, it still tastes
oh,
sharp.
no, yeah, I just think I've had, in the last few batches, I've put way too much.
Yeah.
And I don't really peel my ginger either, but.
Well, it doesn't matter. I find if you cut it, the smaller you cut it.
Oh, no, I put
the
it
more
in my
it's-
KitchenAid and
Oh.
it's just totally skinny.
Yeah. I never used to peel ginger when I made chai. I don't think the peel makes much of a difference.
Yeah, I don't know, Irma's recipe always called.
The chocolate's any good? Are they interesting?
Yeah, really good.
They look fancy. One of them has chilies in it. I think they all be different, but maybe something. I don't know.
Say what? Did you look at this? Inauspicious days and name prayer. Oh. I guess this is the. What kind of day?
What kind of goodness on you feel it's not?
Hello, are you here tomorrow?
There's quite a few people online today.
Single people?
Yeah,
None of them write in questions? They don't write in questions?
I didn't really tell anyone to ask questions. I mean, I could. Sometimes people do. We just generally just sort of chat.
Yeah.
Or ignore them. Or ignore them.
Or ignore them, yeah. We haven't had any,
Hey, for that packaging job that you've got, did, oh, okay. Yeah, so that's why I called it packaging job. I was just wondering if you have to be an American citizen to do it.
Oh.
Do you have to have like a tax number and stuff like that?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. I was thinking maybe Melfar could do it actually. Can you get people jobs?
There's not a ton of work. It's only a couple of people that the whole business, so I usually just take care of everything myself.
Do those places still offer like all sorts of benefits, like free yoga classes and free Reiki?
What do you mean?
Because I was hearing that last year a friend of mine was going to those, he had like a card, and he was going to those and then they said, oh yeah, it's great, I can get all this free Reiki and Tai Chi and.
Oh, I don't know.
many hours a week are you working, just total, in all of your gigs?
30, 35.
Oh, really? That's a lot. Almost full time. Me, I work, like, in the classroom, I do, 6 hours a day. Yeah. But then I gotta do preparation outside of class and grade some papers and stuff.
In Mahesh, what did the yogis say when they tried to kick him out of the ashram?
I don't know.
Namaste.
What is your sense of the intelligence of this being either transcending the mental apparatus of the system, or the intellectual the system being restricted to its own construction?
Well, there's not really any restriction. It's a lot like light shining through a prism. You know, before the light permeates the whole space, and if you catch a portion of it in a prism, then it gets broken down into a very specific form and shines out that way. But there's no dichotomy between the light that's gone through the prism and shining there and the light that permeates the space. The one is an aspect of the other. So the aspect of the brain-based intelligence that's process-oriented and biochemically based and so on and so forth, is an aspect of the permeative inherent intelligence, which vastly transcends it, but let's call it the personal intelligence is an aspect of that.
It's like you can have a dim prism.
Sure. But that doesn't reflect on the inherent intelligence, which is always transcendentally intelligent. The personal intelligence, the central nervous system based intelligence, is a form that appears along with all other forms that appear, and the forms appear as embodiments of the ground condition, which is pure intelligence, pure transcendental intelligence, let's say. And like all forms, the body-based intelligence can come and go, but occur in various, apparent configurations or what have you. But the ground condition is not affected by that. Apparitions come from the ground. Apparitions depend on the ground. The ground does not depend upon apparitions. So what you really are is the basis for what appears. And what appears is dependent upon what you really are, but what you really are is not dependent upon what appears. So if you were in a car accident and had lost half of your brain, you got a little bit of windshield embedded in the whatever. We don't need to be too graphic, although that's fun. Picture this. You would lose your brain-based functioning, mental functioning might deteriorate, but the inherent intelligence would not. And you are always both. So right now, you have awareness of and experience of your brain-based intelligence, and you also have awareness and experience of the ground state intelligence, because they have very different, let's say, dimensions and very different textual characteristics. They coexist.
That implies that people in comas still have that same intelligence.
Of course, and dead people. When you die, the inherent intelligence doesn't go anywhere. It can't because it is not dependent upon forms, and birth and death happen is of forms.
What about dead bodies? Is there inherent intelligence in the?
There's no end. There's
no
nothing but
right.
Everything is pure intelligence.
Right.
The existence of atoms is pure intelligence. Intelligence is doing atoms. Atoms would not exist without intelligence. It's an expression of intelligence. The body is an expression of pure intelligence. The floor is an expression of pure intelligence. The same intelligence, the same expression. If you burn the floor up, then the floor is a different embodiment of interior intelligence. Then it's an ash embodiment of interior intelligence. If the body dies and rots, then it's a different expression of inherent intelligence. But the inherent intelligence does not gain or lose anything by the way it appears, because all appearances come and go and can vacillate, with inconceivable breadth of possibility in their apparition.
And I just have a prejudice against it.
Sorry?
I just have a little prejudice against it. But
Well, you don't have to like them. You just have to eat them.
Oh. Why wait till you're dead?
Good point.
Are there souls? Because it sounds like if my inherent intelligence remains the same when I've got the windshield embedded in it, or when the moment I die or something like that, it sounds like there's something that continues.
Yeah, it doesn't continue because it's beyond space and time. I mean, it is continuous. It never stops, but it never started either. But it's not, but it doesn't exist in space and time. Space and time exist in it.
And there also isn't a you.
No, of course not. And souls, I mean, all of these kinds of metaphysical terms suffer from a lack of precise, what are you referring to when you say soul? You know, it's a very vague, squishy supposition. It's not really very precise in what it's referring to.
But in the past, you've talked about like individual being this range of frequencies,
Sure.
and then the bottom part can go out, but then there's all these other levels.
Sure.
That,
Sure, there are many levels that are transphysical. You know, in medieval metaphysics, the Rosicrucians and all that, they broadly classified the subtle anatomy of a human into 3 layers: the body, the animal soul, and the spirit. And the spirit was the inherent intelligence. The spirit was eternal. The body was perishable, obviously, and comes and goes. And the animal soul is the subtle energy which informs it and which serves as a kind of the structural bridge between the spirit and the body. So it's like the prana, you know, the prana body, or the astral body, or what have you, the etheric body, depending on your classification system. And then in modern metaphysics, or lack thereof, we have this very vague word soul that goes to heaven or hell or something or whatever, which is just hopelessly mired in innuendo and imprecision. Like, exactly what are we talking about here? And again, these kinds of subtler energy dimensions of experience are, you know, a metaphor for what can be immediately explored by the kind of exploration of non consensus reality focuses of attention within the experiential field. You know, this is a continuum of all possible conditions right here, right now. So if there's subtle energy, it is right here, right now. If there's absolutely transcendental energy, it's right here, right now. So all of this is directly discoverable simply by being with the experience, the experiential textures from outside the context of one's normalcy. One's sense of normalcy, if any, is what serves as a constraint, or like a filtering mechanism, a mechanism of denial that basically ignores the vast swatches of experience that seem to be irrational or make no sense or undefinable. And that's the creation of the sort of the pop psychology conscious mind versus the unconscious mind. To an advanced yogi or realized being, there's no such division. It's a continuum. Conscious mind exists in the context of the unconscious mind. They're just different aspects of the same thing, the same continuum.
Peter, when you use you know, consent, when you talk about consensus reality, I mean, who's in the consensus? I mean, except for me.
It's just a hypothetical, well, this year, it's just when I use that as a term to refer to a hypothetical
Okay.
sense of materialistic normalcy that, you know, like some sort of hypothetical worldview that theoretically someone might have been indoctrinated into, where you are a byproduct of your body existing in an objective world, you know, in precarious dependence upon all sorts of delicate conditions which you have to cling to with great fear and anxiety, and so on and so forth.
Or so, I mean, like, I suppose another one would be, I mean, like when you're a child, or I mean, even now, I mean, you just sort of take in everything your mother or your father tell you, and you just sort of adopt that as your own.
Of course. Well, that's where the consensus reality comes from.
You know, when
it's the brainwashing of society
Trump,
and
the
most
great leader,
parents.
says something.
Exactly. Of course, it's true. If the government says it, it must be true, right?
Yeah, but I mean, it's on me to accept that. I mean, I'm the one that's forming the consensus in a sense.
Well, yeah, and if you're a yogi of any stage, then you begin to notice that.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're not, then you're just a schmo. It's a technical term.
Right.
Is there anything you can say about what experience would be like if you're dead?
No.
I thought you'd say that.
Because it couldn't possibly be put into words.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to have a physical orientation, and all of our words are based around a sensory, you know, sensory quasi-physical framework. It's like trying to say something about very deep sleep.
Yeah.
You know, tell me, what can you say about very deep sleep you experienced last night? You know, you have to lapse into sort of very sloppy poetry, and it might be evocative, but it's certainly not going to be very precise. But I'll tell you this, that the state that you will experience after you die, you're experiencing right now. So it's not something you're going to come to.
Experience.
Exactly. It's what feels like the background of this experience. The most fundamental root condition of this experience. But anyway, it's no need to speculate on it, because you'll find out soon enough. Well, it is, but you don't even need to imagine it. You can experience it. You can go to it directly. You know, do the equivalent of deep diving within your experience and go beyond anything that seems to be something, and to see how far you can go. And you'll never actually leave experience, but you may leave characteristics fairly early on. You know, it's fairly easy to experience transphysical mentality, because we all have it, and it's actually not that far removed.
Because I normally don't do that, because I think it is hard.
Well, of course, exactly, but it's the fantasy that it is hard that becomes a self-fulfilling, you know, orientation.
Right.
I mean, you know, a very easy way to experiment with this kind of thing is to look at very simple psychic phenomena. You know, feel someone's aura, or you know, or you know, go into the wood and the floor and see what it feels like to itself. I mean, it may sound like a fantasy or a game of imagination, but in actual fact, that may just be a trick or a technique of priming the pump to explore a dimension of your experience that you're not used to going to.
See what the wood on the floor feels like to itself.
Yeah, anything. I mean, I just pull that out of my hat, you know.
Yeah, I've been doing it just now.
Sure. I mean, you know, when toying with the idea of psychic phenomena, without bothering you know, kind of a metaphysical justification of exactly what the fuck we're talking about, if anything. But just using that as a jumping off point to be with your experience in novel ways and discover the possibility of really interesting experiential qualities that are immediately available, that are you know, outside and maybe way outside, if that's meaningful, the context of one's normal experiential framework. But the easiest way is to feel people's auras. Auras are very, very obvious. You know, people have such a different flavor, and you know, it's just so easy to do. And right away, it's like, well, how am I doing that? What is this? What is happening? You know, and of course, all those questions just go out and go, there's nowhere for them to land. But nonetheless, it's a really obvious, you know, actuality that's just undeniably self-verifying, and yet, what is it? And that can become a doorway to more extreme and more obviously non-physically oriented experience. See, this computer right now, I'll give you an example. This computer is plugged into the wall right now. So this computer is actually feeling the electricity that's in the wall. There's no barrier, there's no point where the electricity that's in the wall, it hits a barrier where it's that, and on the other side is electricity in the computer. The electricity in the wall is in the computer, and it's one continuum. And yet I pull the plug, and all of a sudden, the electricity in the wall hasn't gone anywhere, but it's not in the computer anymore.
Yeah.
So this is analogous to, so right now, the ground state intelligence, the ground state vitality is you as a subsystem, you as Mahesh, the human being, the embodied, so on and so forth, is plugged in as a continuous expression of the ground state energy. At death, you become unplugged, but the ground state doesn't go anywhere. It's just not circulating within the relative subsystem anymore. But you're feeling it right now.
Yeah.
And what is seeing your experience is actually the ground state. It's not your body. I mean, this is another very easy way to go to an extra physical experience, is look at what is seeing your experience. It's not physically produced. And this is very, very easy to verify. What's seeing your experience does not fluctuate with your physical condition. You can be totally stoned, tripping. You can be passing out drunk. You can have 108-degree fever. And yet, what's seeing your experience is absolutely constant, absolutely invariable. So the physical condition is wavering enormously. And the thought processes may be wavering enormously with that. You know, when you're delirious with a fever, your thoughts are, and you're in all sorts of weird torments and, hallucinations. But all of that is appearing and being seen with absolute clarity and absolute lucidity, like all of your experiences. And so what's seeing your experience is not in the body. It is not being generated by the body. It is a ground state that sees. It is a ground state that knows.
It's not in the body, but the body is it.
Yeah. The body is an outgrowth of it. It's a continuum. But the ground state is not dependent upon the body or the physical condition. I mean, there's no disjunction, there's no gap. But right now in experience, a large part of the experience is, you could say, bodily oriented. So, if someone you know, if all of a sudden you were in extreme pain, or all of a sudden, you know, you had a stick that went into your brain or something, a large part of your experience would change drastically, but a part of your experience would not change.
Yeah.
And that's the portion that is of the continuum, which is not physically based and independent of the physical organism.
So in the spiritual world, you know, we hear the words, die before you die. Does that point to recognizing the ground state?
Well, in one sense it does. I think a lot of systems that say die before you die refer more to transcending a sense of identifying with the personality or with the body, mind, and so on and so forth. But it's ultimately the same thing. Basically, when you see what you are and when you discover that, you know, a great deal of what you are and ultimately the root of what you are is extra physical and is what, you know, we might call the state, the post-death or pre-birth state, then you could say, obviously, that can be described that way.
That's why astral travel is irrelevant,
Yeah,
because it's the same.
yeah, it's just the same thing. You know, everything's the same.
It helps to show that you aren't the physical body.
Well, it helps to show that there's a much greater breadth of experience. So immediate experience, it's immediately available. So it undermines and disproves any kind of simplistic consensus reality interpretive frameworks you may be in the habit of orienting to.
And also, if you think you are your body, you're not going to travel astrally anyhow.
Yeah, sure.
These things happen.
If you die, will you come back to say hello to us? You know, like in
Where to start? Where to finish?
in like the Buddhist traditions, there's like supposedly they can't.
This is
go
me
off.
coming back to say hello. Hi.
But supposedly, like, you know, there's like rainbows all over the funeral service, you know, and they're, yeah.
There can be all kinds of cities that happen or not, but it's meaningless. It's irrelevant. The important point is to see what this is, and then what seems to be the side effects or the signs of that is irrelevant. It's the seeing that matters. What the symptoms of that looks like to other people is completely irrelevant.
And in a lot of Buddhist traditions, there's this hope of not returning, right? Just staying dead and empty.
But that's simplistic. The point is to see that you aren't here. You didn't return. There is no here. There is no return. There's no being here. There's no leaving here. So the it's not like there is a here that you need to leave, and then that's some superior condition. That's that's a more immature way of looking at it. When you see there is no here, this is the ground state. You are not incarnated right now. You never came back. You were never born. So congratulations, you achieved it. You didn't come back. There's no back to come. And when you see that, you see that the way in which that's so. This is not some inferior condition. This is the absolute right here. It's nothing but the absolute. Nothing other than the absolute could possibly exist. And when you see that, then you see the way that it's so, and it becomes quite clear that that is the case. And then, childish fantasies about incarnation and becoming free of incarnation and all of this are revealed for the silliness that they are.
Well, it's interesting. My immediate response to what you said is like, what a fascinating, what a marvelous idea. Well, maybe it's like at a certain level, like the most immediate response is a sort of joy or happiness or delight, and then I guess is the languaging of that as what a wonderful idea, or what something I had never thought of before. It was kind of like I had bought into the idea of, oh well, I've heard this Buddhist concept many times. I've heard Buddhist masters talking about wanting to leave and never return, right? And oh, there must be some truth to that.
So maybe then, what is birth and death?
Birth and death are stories. They're claims. Just like waking and sleeping are stories. They're claims.
They're claims? Is that the word?
Claims, assertions. Because any condition, any apparent state is completely unresolvable. You can say, oh, this is the waking state. Prove it. What do you mean by that? Find a waking state that is undeniably establishable as actually being that. It can't be done. Oh no, but then I'm going to go to sleep and then I'm going to dream. It's like, they're empty claims. Find a sleep state that is undeniably that.
I can find a sleep state, but it's here.
Exactly. I mean, it turns out to be just an empty claim. Oh, now I'm asleep. No, now I'm dreaming. And now I'm awake.
So lucid dreaming and lucid waking, that's you could say in one sense that's seeing the emptiness of those claims, right?
Yes, it's the discovery that you are not within this, as you may think of yourself as being within your normal, in the context of your normal interpretational framework. You are not within this is within you. And which is essentially what happens when you go lucid dreaming. It's like, oh, there's a dream happening and it looks like I'm in it, but I'm not actually in it. I'm not subject to this dream. I can enjoy the dream, it's available, but I'm not trapped in it because I'm not in it. And that's the revelation of lucid dreaming. And what you might call lucid waking is exactly the same thing. It's the discovery, oh, I'm not in this world, I'm not in this body. They're in me. Just exactly like the dream is within the dreamer. The dreamer is not in the dream, it's not stuck in the dream. The dream appears within the dreamer. I mean, not spatially necessarily, but the context within which the dream occurs is within the dreamer. And likewise, the context within which all this is appearing is within you. You aren't in this, you aren't here. Here is in you. Here is here because you're here, not the other way around. There's no objective here. Any more than the here you experience in a dream is an objective here. You know, you can seem to be in Berkeley walking down the street in the dream, but that here-ness and that Berkeley are all within you. And this here-ness and this Berkeley, or Kensington, is within you. You can look at it without, you know, if that sounds too metaphysical, grandiose, just look at it as within your experience.
Because it's all sense perception.
Well, whether or not it's sense perception, it is experience.
Experience, yes.
Comes down to the fact that there's no subset of this.
Right, exactly.
There's no subset of this. What do you mean by that?
This is complete and this is everything there is. Everything else is a figment of your personality, your imagination, or whatever.
Yeah, that there's any division or any substates or any subconditions is all fantasy.
Absolutely.
This is the soul condition, and what it is completely inscrutable. It's completely transcendental. You can't, it transcends definability, it transcends conceivability. So you can't possibly say what it is or how it is, because it transcends structurality too.
But we're brought up to understand that everything is analyzable and
Yeah.
it's like a car, you know, there's an engine inside.
Yeah, we're brought up within a materialistic context, in a context of cause and effect, in a context of logic, in a context of structure. So, you know, this exists because of that, and this is doing that.
And this makes up.
Yeah, my consciousness is a byproduct of, you know, electrochemical activity within my brain, you know, which exists because of this, which exists because of this. But it's all this imaginary, you know, irregular set of complexity, autonomous sub-elements, and supposedly interacting with each other, producing some result. Surprise. It's a little different than that.
And yeah, on one level it is that too.
Well, yeah, that's not negated.
It's not negated, exactly.
But that doesn't accurately and comprehensively describe what's going on here.
Nothing accurately
Yes,
describes.
right. Nothing. That's completely transcendental. So you have all these versions of it, and they're all viable, but they're all hanging here in the midst of this vastness.
Alternative facts.
Yeah, everything anyone thinks they know is fake news. They may as well got it off of Facebook. Of your entire worldview, you may have gotten it off of, you may as well have gotten it off of Facebook.
Yeah.
I did get
Delete your.
Well.
Kelly and Kylie, my guys. So it's all one thing, and yet sometimes it can seem as though you've taken in an energy from other people that doesn't belong to you. What is that?
Well, you said it. It's all one thing. It's a seeming. There's infinite seemings, but no seeming is actually that. Every seeming is like an illusion of the radiance. Or let's say a partial interpretation of the radiance.
And yet there's like this activity of releasing energy that doesn't belong to you, quote unquote.
May seem to be.
Yeah.
Another seeming. Because there's no actual belonging to you.
Right.
There's an endless morphing of flavors of, you can call it what you might interpret as being energy. And what any of it is, and where any of it comes from, and where any of it goes, and where any of it is localized, is completely unanswerable as categories or as questions. And so you can interpret that as, well, I'm getting energy from people and I'm releasing it, or I'm holding it, or this and that. But all of that interpretation is sort of a heavy-handed shoehorning of the basic fact, which is this weird seeming of endless unresolvable flavors, into a structurality that is narrow,
Right.
and that conforms to a certain hypothesis of process that just will not stand up to. It's not that what's being interpreted or called that isn't happening. It's just that what's happening is vastly more than that, and completely exceeds that model of structure, that model of process.
Yeah, I've seen it with other things. And it's sort of.
But I mean, that applies to everything.
Yeah.
Anything you can say is, oh, but it seems like blah, 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 blah.
Right. And there's.
It seems like there's history and cause and effect. It seems like there's individual beings. It seems like there's other people. It seems like there's this. It seems like, just go on, carry on, And yeah, all those seemings are fine and they're not being negated or denied. But what's there is a partialization, a partial interpretation of something that vastly transcends that is completely more than that and completely other than that, in actuality.
Mm-hmm.
So all these interpretations are partial hypotheses of actuality that is beyond actually being limited or contained to that.
It makes it sound very complicated, that there's this and there's this and
Yeah.
there's this, but it's actually incredibly simple because it's just this.
There's only one event. It's only one thing that happens one way. And it includes every and anything that you think of as being its parts or its components or its aspects or its structures or its entities or its events or anything. So all of this supposition of complexity is a misinterpretation of absolute simplicity, because the simplicity is infinite. And the very nature of infinity is the flavor of infinity presents as infinite differentiation. So it seems to be, it's like the ultimate Rorschach blot. There's such an inconceivable overload of information. You can free associate anything you want on it and find evidence for it. But what all of that actually is just this one fundamental fact. Just one fundamental event that is single. It is one thing that happens in one way, in one place, in one time, inclusive. And yet that looks like all of this. And that can seem to be all this apparent complexity that we may impute to it.
But there's really no place or time anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
The place is no place and the time is no time. Or you could say the place is here, inclusive, and the time is now, inclusive. two different ways of saying exactly the same thing. But there's no then and there's no there.
Right.
If this seems more like absolute inclusivity than consensus reality, then neither one is more or less accurate than.
That's true. Neither one is more or less accurate. But any seeming is not true, or let's say it's not comprehensive.
Like,
Not
let's say this
inclusive.
seems like radiant presence.
Right. That itself is just a seeming. You know, if you say it seems like, and you can actually come up with anything there, that's just another interpretation. I mean, radiant presence is a metaphor for something which is absolutely inconceivable. There is no radiant presence. But as metaphors go, it's a whole lot more accurate than just about everything else. But it's false. It's not true. If you can get to the fact that there's only radiant presence and see that, then just lose the radiant presence and you've got it. But getting to the fact that it's all radiant presence is a good, primer.
So last time you were talking about, or one of the last times you were talking about beauty as being a sort of redundancy or a returning upon itself, a coherence, right, with itself, and then I've been thinking about well, that in contrast to something being cool or someone being cool, right? But that's more in line with the sort of consensus reality, or is there like a certain seeming functionality about or apparent functionality about something taken to be cool?
Something taken to be cool is an artifact of your interpretation of what you identify yourself to be relative to an interpretation of something that you would like to augment or add to yourself or be like. So it's predicated on falseness, because your idea of what you are is already wrong, because you can't possibly have an idea of what you actually are. So any kind of self-image you have of yourself is already wrong. It's already inaccurate. And so then imagining, boy, I'd really like to be like that. Here's this guy that's a rock star. Here's this guy that's whatever, beautiful or sexy and whatever you think is cool. You don't need to define it, but just the fact that it's there means there's an imaginary relationality between what you imagine yourself to be and what you imagine them to be. Then you have some kind of admiration for that. But what you imagine yourself to be is inaccurate. What you imagine them to be is inaccurate. So the entire thing is just more interpretation. You can't know if you're cool or not cool. If you see what you really are, you can't possibly know. Those categories just fade, completely disappear as in relevance or in usefulness. Since you can't possibly tell what you are, you can't possibly assess yourself. So if there is assessing of yourself going on, it's actually assessing of a fantasy of yourself, of an imaginary self-image, which is the normal psychological model of self-awareness. I mean, typically, one imagines oneself to be a certain person who looks a certain way and has a certain nature, a certain station in life, and a certain status. However loosely or solidly those are defined. And then when we look at other people and categorize them in relation to some similar complexity, but it's all fantasy. on all sides.
And some conventionally cool people have the city, as it were, of hypnotizing others into believing that they lack the thing that the
Sure.
cool people have.
Sure. I mean, there's all kinds of people, there's all sorts of people that have a talent for impression, a talent for impressing other people. It's just another talent, just another city. It's like being good at music or being good at anything.
Oh.
It's just an accident of the alignment of the energies, apparently. If you want to know what cool is, well,
You're cool, Peter.
I couldn't say it myself.
Wait till you see him play guitar.
Then you'll know I'm cool.
Forget this
I can
other
play the
stuff.
shit out of a guitar. No, it's interesting. Speaking of these kind of psychological fantasies, when I was a kid, I had a difficult childhood for various reasons, and I thought of myself as very uncruel. And then I discovered I was a good musician, and I was playing in these bands, and all of a sudden everyone was like, wow, this is great. This is, you're so amazing. And I'm like, oh, yeah. I am pretty amazing. Yeah. And the whole thing it's just fabrications. It's all, it's like theater.
That's now. Then it wasn't.
Well, no, no, I was very gullible. I believed it. I bought into it. It was like, oh, great. I'm a rock star. I mean, not much of a star, but, there was sort of all of this imaginary status that came along with it. But it's all a fantasy, both on my part and buying into it, and on the part of anyone that's buying into it by holding it to be so from their point of view. The whole thing's just it's a play acting.
That was before or after you were 22 and you had your big opening?
Before.
Oh, okay.
Afterwards, I was still a good musician, but I was confused.
I'm picturing it about 15.
Yeah.
That one picture of you.
Yeah, when I was 15 is when I started playing in bands, and all of a sudden, like, wow, you're in that band. Wow, gee, I didn't know that. Cheap thrills. But anything that is based on thinking you are a certain way it's a sure sign that it's imaginary, because you can't possibly know what you are. I mean, you can know what you are with absolute intimacy and with a great, breadth of profundity and detail, but you can't actually resolve that or pull that together into actually being anything that you can assess or that has any coherence. Obviously you're intimately familiar with your own flavor and your own sort of, whatever. I mean, we don't have language to talk about what that presents as, but it doesn't actually cohere into an entity or a single system or anything that you can get a handle on. It's just this open-ended morass of weirdness.
It seems like it would be impossible to know your own flavor.
Yeah, well, it's impossible to know it conclusively, but there's a great deal of familiarity with it in whatever way there is. An interesting meditation is to look at yourself in the mirror, like for 10 minutes or a half hour. Just sit and look at yourself, and you'll just experience this, like it's like layers of an onion. This barrage of flavors that are immediately feel like me. It's yeah, that's me. This feels like me. I mean, it's not analytical or logical. It's just it's like sinking into a rich stew or something. But it doesn't actually come together as anything. But you do this whole thing. It's like, wow, there's all of this richness of meanness, and then it's like, oh, so what? What is it? Was it anything? I mean, I don't know. It's just this richness that doesn't really go anywhere and doesn't. Like, so it doesn't resolve as anything or into anything. There's no result. There's no. It's not like there's a list and you get to the bottom and sum it up and there's the answer or the finality. It's just this open-ended. It's like you'd be with another person, you're with another person and their flavor is very them and it's distinctly not you. But in what way? You can't answer that question. Like what are they? What is their flavor? You're tasting it, but what is it? You never answer it. I mean, it's the peculiarity of the way the radiance presents. It presents with an infinite degree of specificity, but always with an infinite degree of unresolvability simultaneously. So there's all this barrage of very specifics and flavors, and this and that, and precisely, you bite into a piece of chocolate, and it's clearly not biting into a piece of broccoli. It's very distinctly that way. But then, exactly what does the chocolate taste like? It's unresolvable. You can't say exactly what it is. And what exactly does broccoli taste like? You can't say. So it's this continual paradox of it's a barrage of just it's inconceivable amount of specifics, and yet none of it pulls together as anything. None of it clumps together, resolves with any kind of coherence.
Metaphorically speaking, would you say that realization occurs first on the most subtle levels and then spreads down to more gross levels?
Yeah. I mean, very loosely metaphorically speaking.
You could say that it exists on the subtle levels already.
Yeah. I mean, when you discover realization, it's very surprising because you don't even know that's what it is until after it happens, and it's like, what's that? What is this? It's like, oh my God, this is what everyone means by realization. Who knew? And it's very surprising because it's not what you expect. So it's I would say it happens irrationally before the rational can catch up. Realization is very peculiar because it's a definite actuality. Realization is undeniably, you could say, an event or a condition, although that's a little simplistic. And it's it's unmistakable when realization has occurred or occurs. It's absolutely undeniable that it has happened, and yet paradoxically, it's absolutely nothing whatsoever, and it's not even the tiniest bit different than the preceding state of non-realized. In a lot of, I mean, you can say a lot of very paradoxical things about it, which are actually quite true and quite evocative. You can say that realization is the discovery that there is no realization. The discovery that normalcy is not normalcy, but normalcy is what it always was. And when you see what that is, that's realization. But it's not leaving normalcy at all. It's just, oh, here's normalcy, just like yesterday and the day before and tomorrow. but wow. Anyway, it's best not to, except for amusement, it's best not to talk about it. Better to do it.
You were saying an hour ago something, you made a quip about were we ever serious, or were we ever being serious? And you can say that because you're just playing around with trying to express the inexpressible, or you're.
Because what does serious mean?
I'm believing in them.
I'm deadly serious about being playful. So am I serious or not?
No.
Definitely.
Serious is not an actual category. There's no such thing as serious or not serious in actuality. Actuality is the most deadly seriousness, and it is entirely playful. Entirely playful. And actuality is making itself up completely for a lark, and yet it's deadly serious. All the wars and genocide and horror and pain and suffering is this idea of a hoot.
That doesn't mean anything.
I know, that's what I'm saying.
There's sort of absurd seriousness that certain religious traditions have about their own self-importance. Right?
Sure.
Like Buddhists and the rallying cry of we're not going to stop working until every sentient being is liberated. Right?
It's kind of an in-joke. all the realized the realized Buddhists, they say that and then they go, because as soon as you realize there's no unliberated beings.
Is it a marketing play?
It's the usual, which is a misinterpretation. Well, it's quitting time, so I'm going to be a stickler for form, as I usually am, and say good night.